First up is Deb Olin Unferth, and she is the author of the memoir Revolution, The Year I Fell in Love and Went to Join the War, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Also the story collection Minor Robberies and the novel Vacation, which was a winner of the Cabell First Novel Award. Her work has appeared in Noon, Harper's, the New York Times, McSweeney's, the Boston Review, Conjunctions, and elsewhere, and she has received 3 Pushcart Prizes and a Creative Capital Grant for Innovative Literature. She is an associate professor at the University of Texas, and her next book is forthcoming from Grey Wolf. So thank you, Deb.
I've been so honored to be in Noon so many times, and I think that Diane was maybe the first person to publish me, or the second, like one of the first or second to publish me. Say first. The first person to publish me, yeah. And there were so many years when I didn't think I was going to write anymore, and Diane just kept pushing me, and I know it wasn't only me, but it was also Clancy, and there were several of us, Kim Chinquy, who we were all kind of around the same age range, and we were all kind of, trying to figure out just sort of how to be writers and failing miserably, and Diane was just there encouraging us all the time, and so I feel like it's sort of this little family. So I'm just, once again, I'm so happy to be here, and so honored to be in Noon again. So I'm going to read my 3 tiny shorts that were in this issue. Decorate, decorate. I'm just going to leave it pretty empty in here, she thought. Not have any decorations that bring in mud or require too much tending. She knew better than to over-decorate. But now she worries that maybe that was wrong. She has decorated sparingly, that's for sure. She left a lot out. She hurries now to look for substitutes to drag in quickly over the grass, tries to throw out the ones that don't take up enough space, and instead puts in one that is big and bulky and requires lots and lots of attention. Now that's a decoration, she says, slapping its side. Can you top that? That decoration needs some effort, some hard work. You can't leave that one out in the shed. You can't turn the light off on that one. You have to bring that one around with you everywhere you go. It keeps you busy. Is this all there is, she wonders, looking at her decoration? It was an old question, one she used to ask back when she had hardly any decorations and her rooms were so empty. She considers it now. What if this decoration stops working or goes away someplace and never comes back? Then where will she be? She needs another backup decoration, perhaps in the basement. She'll need to leave it in the dark, locked away. But what kind of decoration could that be? She walks off through the snow, her decoration whining and crawling behind her, and she contemplates it, tries to see its future. The worst. The entire episode lasted nearly a month as she and her husband slowly figured out what was going on and ruled out solution after solution, moving from the minor, washing the bedclothes, to the major, dragging the mattress out to the dumpster, to the absurd, covering the entire apartment in a thick, white bedbug powder that burst into a cloud when she tried to vacuum. That night, when they were cleaning the powder from the carpet, was the worst night because her husband kept breaking into laughter and saying, "Come on, it's a little funny," when it wasn't funny at all. And she saw that she would never be what he wanted her to be, and she felt alone and old and angry and afraid and covered in white powder. The day her husband moved out was the worst day of her life, though at the time she was too angry at him to know it. Only later did she realize the truth of this, and then she spent years, a decade even, looking back at that day and feeling the worstness of it, living in that worstness, so that each day that followed was also the worst day of her life because it contained the fact that he'd left her within it. Last one. This one's like a page and a half. The other two were only 1 page, so settle in. The walk. The idea was to go for a walk. The baby in a stroller, the child by the hand, the path straight and scenic, the weather warm and breezy, the family fine and in good humor. But the dog got too hot and lay panting on the ground, and they'd forgotten again to bring the water. The baby, Kryptonite they called her, was in one of her moods, weeping on and off, refusing to sit in the stroller, tugging off her hat and throwing it in the dirt, so that they had to stop every few yards and retrieve the hat, pass the baby from one parent to the other, because she only wanted to be with the father, while he, exhausted, weakened, he said, kept handing her back. The father didn't want to carry the baby. He'd carried the baby yesterday when they'd gone to see the sand dunes. Kryptonite had wailed and was hot and put a fistful of sand in her mouth, and they'd forgotten to bring the water in the car then, too. He sat down in the sand for a while, calling out, "We are not having another kid," a sentence he'd been repeating the whole trip, often within earsight of the mother, to who his horror only laughed. Kryptonite always wanted the father, the mother was thinking. Both the children did. Even though without the mother they'd both be dead in a day. Kryptonite could hog a whole event anytime, anywhere. The mother couldn't manage to have a simple conversation with the father without an elaborate pause on the road to hand off baby, transfer bags, retrieve hat, and so on. Couldn't manage to have a simple joke between them like the old days. "Daddy's girl," the mother kept saying each time the baby reached for him, sweetly at first, but after a while with clenched teeth. The baby went back and forth screaming between them. The father was hot, like the dog, who kept dropping to the ground. The father worried about the dog. He felt every emotion the dog did, powerfully, felt at least as much pain as the dog did at any moment, felt the dog's hunger, felt the dog's thirst, felt the dog's loneliness and isolation at being the only one of its kind amid this crowd, felt the suffering of walking a path in the heat, wearing a heavy fur coat, of walking with no destination, no food or water, tied to a rope, dragged like a slave. The mother could tell just what the father was thinking. He didn't have to say a word. Just the way he moved his feet along the ground said it all, the mother thought for the 10th time that day. The older child was the only one among them who was having any fun. She was on her feet, too old for any stroller. She was so used to her younger sister's cries that she didn't hear them. A kryptonite shield, the father always said, a talent that later in life would be seen as a flaw, lack of empathy, people would say. She was so used to her parents bickering that she didn't hear them either, uninterested in the suffering dog. She strolled down the path, looking at flowers. Thank you.
This is wonderful. Thank you, Deb, and for coming all this way from Texas. Next is Lincoln Michel. His fiction appears in Tin House, American Short Fiction, Noon, and elsewhere. He is the online editor of Electric Literature and the co-editor of Gigantic Magazine. His debut collection, Upright Beasts, is forthcoming from Coffee House Press.
Thanks for coming out, everyone. And yeah, you know, like Deb said, this is always a really great event to be at. And Noon, I don't know, you know, we live in this age where we're writers, we write so much, and it's on Twitter, it's on blogs, it disappears, and it's very, very nice to be in a magazine that has such care in the editing and the design, and is really something you want to keep on your shelf. And I also like what Deb said about feeling something like family. I remember the first time I was in Noon, which I think was 2010, Deb sent a Facebook message and tagged everyone who was in the issue and told everyone something she really loved about each of their stories, which was just very, very nice. Okay, this story, I just have one, and it is called The Yellow Spark of Clarity. She had her revelation, the first of many, while eating what she thought was a grapefruit. The grapefruit, if it had been a grapefruit, was her breakfast before work. Work was designing logos for the division of a corporation devoted to packaging new types of fruit-shaped gummy-based candy. The grapefruit was actually a lemon and burned her tongue. The first part of the revelation was that her life was meaningless, but the second part of the revelation was that her life could be made meaningful by severing her new, enlightened state from her old, fleshy state as surely as her steak knife had sawn through the pulp of the unusually large lemon. On the subway ride, the car and people and outside world looked bright and slightly plastic, as if God had covered everything in a layer of cellophane. As a general rule, she bought lots of citruses in all different shapes and sizes. She cut them up and put them in dishes and drinks. She could not remember if the lemon had been incorrectly placed in the grapefruit section, or if she had bought the lemon from the lemon section specifically because it was so large. Or had it actually just been a sour grapefruit and not a lemon at all? Exiting the subway platform, she had the revelation that God did exist, but existed 1 second after the universe, so that he was perpetually judging without being able to touch. Her boyfriend didn't quite see it this way. You quit your job? I quit my job and moved to this city so you could keep yours. When he shouted, his mouth was an oval with 2 little nubbins at the corners. Looking at him, she had the revelation that love could only come from bitterness, and that his anger was a form of adoration. And yet, the rest of her bittersweet revelation told her that her boyfriend was a cicada shell that she had been trapped inside of for 5 years. When she told her boyfriend that, he squeezed his hair. Then he said he was glad, no, seriously, actually really fucking glad, that she was ending it because she wasn't the girl he used to know, not anymore. She grabbed an orange out of the fruit bowl and tore off the skin as she walked outside. She thought, in a yellow spark of clarity, that she was not a cicada, but the songbird who devours the cicada and then flies into the sky. Her doctor disagreed with her. He said that she had a tumor in her brain that was the size of a grape. That's not very big, she said, rubbing the rind of her scalp. A grapefruit is quite large for a tumor, he said. Ah, I thought you said a grapefruit, not a grapefruit. The doctor gave her a sour look. He held up the scan and pointed, but the glowing mass behind his finger was distinctly lemon-shaped. The doctor had a round metal disc on his forehead, and for a moment, he looked like an angel, but then he turned his head and resumed his human form. She squinted as the oval lights covered her. One person standing above her stuck a needle in her arm, another slipped a mask over her face. At that moment, she had the revelation that she might not have any more revelations. These lumpy heads towering over her were such unfamiliar shapes. Were these new types of honey bells that she'd never be able to touch? Thank you.
Thank you. Mary South will read next, and she is a graduate of the MFA program in fiction at Columbia University. Her writing has appeared in the New Yorker's Book Bench and Words Without Borders. She is a senior editor at Noon, and this is her first published story.
I would just like to thank Diane for her insightful edits to my story and say that I've loved being a part of bringing the journal out these past few years. So, in the fullest sense, the mask the technician fastens against the woman's face is both rigid and pliable, a plastic ribcage. He has asked her the metal question several times. Bone pins? She envisions a skeleton hung together in makeshift fashion, like so many lace alterations on a bridal dress. Behind the glass partition, the technician has an erection as he examines the scans of her brain. The technician often has this reaction to the calcified meniscuses of old men, the filament-thin femurs of children, tectonic fractures in spinal columns, white-knuckled ghostings of tumors in intestines, dendritic arbors of faulty neurons, fallopian tubes drifting, octopine. The woman is certain she can feel the biopsy incision in her skull begin to bleed. An itch of incipient follicles troubles her where she was shaved, and she has been worrying the scab and keeping the wound red and stigmata fresh. "How are you doing?" the technician asks. "She's fine." "Great," he says. The woman sneezes and sees a spattering of saliva hover and vibrate above her on the beveled wall. Do they clean this orifice after every use? "Breathe in," the technician instructs. She inhales and holds her breath. The woman regrets not accepting the sedative offered to her by the nurse at the front desk. The technician is a man of restraint. He always waits until his subjects have left the premises before pleasuring himself. With a tender tug of anticipation, he shifts his genitals beneath the waistband of his scrubs. "And relax. Breathe in. Okay?" he asks. The woman squeezes the air from the pneumatic bulb he had placed in her hand in case of a panic attack. She signals him that her head is open. The technician retracts the platform and the woman removes her gauze to show him the surgical cartography of her scalp. "I can't see what you feel," he says. "Is she ready to go back in? Breathe in." The machine calms to a whimper and the platform rolls out of the hole. The woman pulls on her dirty clothing with the exception of her panties. There is a stain on the cotton that she doesn't want to touch her skin. Her hips, with their lepidopteran spread, are snappable as moth wings. The woman asks when she can expect an answer. There are no waiting patients. In their place, a janitor hums while mopping the floor. He often has such a satisfied reaction to the grime. Thank you.
Wonderful. Next is R.O. Kwan. Can I give away your name, Reese? I don't know. Her writing has been published in Plowshares, The Believer, Tin House, Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. This is her first appearance in Noon.
Thank you, Diane. I've loved Noon for years, and I'm so glad to be part of this. Pretty much for the past year or so, ever since in June when I had an email from Diane, and since then, saying that she liked the piece I'd sent, pretty much since then, every time I've been, sort of down in the dumps, I've been able to think, wait, but Noon. And it's helped tremendously. And thank you everyone for being here. I'll read a short piece. It's titled Hay. I was at ease in the demi-monde of finance, with its new money cowboy swagger, its practitioners bloated with the confidence of men, and they were all men, paid well at lucrative jobs. The hum of competence filled the office like air conditioning. I built intricate maze-like models, reveling in their fiction of a predictable world. The models multiplied, breeding hypothetical yuan. I liked Beijing, too. In physical fact, I was taller than everyone I met. My stride seemed long and tireless, a conqueror's pace, fit for seizing plunder, measuring land. Even my apartment was sized for shorter people. My feet hung off the bed. While my head approached the dollhouse ceiling, the city put up new towers that pushed against the sky. And the food. I was putting on weight. We were fed at the office, but when I left, I kept eating. For the first time since the past fall, I consistently had enough to eat. I glutted myself on roasted Peking duck and paper-wrapped trout, maipo tofu and thrice-cooked bacon, boiled, succulent jiaozi, Uyghur lamb shish kebabs, mouth-stinging Sichuan hot pots, baozi, jianbing, spiced grass carp. I thought of how often I'd had to skip meals in Knoxhurst. My pants tightened, I loosened a button, and I ate more. Still, there were limits to this equanimity. The city was hot, its inhabitants loud. After the quiet of Knoxhurst, Beijing drivers seemed especially careless. Once, on a morning in June, I came upon a 5-car pileup. Paramedics hauled blood-stained bodies from twisted cars and laid them on the asphalt. A girl in tight jeans lay in a dark pool of blood so vast, I had a senseless idea her fluids had been squeezed from her body. Then, a motorcyclist's wheel flattened the dead girl's foot. I was in Shichitai one evening, less than a mile from my apartment, but I hadn't walked much in the area. Within minutes, I was lost. I continued walking. I assumed I'd find my way. The night was blood temperature. Girls on bicycles swept past, black triangular seats pressing into tight buttocks. No one knew where I was in the old, ill-lit alleys, the zigzag streets of the Hutong, and nobody could look for me. It seemed the tranquility the hermit seeks in the wild, or the starlight on his pillar, could be found in this, the anonymity of solitude. I felt free and blameless. I'd have liked to be lost all night. Too soon, I turned a corner and came across the stalls of street food hawkers, steam coiling up in a haze from grills and open pots. At the last cart, I asked for directions in my accent in Mandarin. The vendor replied, but I couldn't understand him. A couple nearby overheard our exchange and offered to help. As they drew me a map, I noticed a girl who'd stopped to buy food. In the imperial fire of the hawker's cart, I saw the upturned stub of a nose, flat hair streaked blue, a translucent plastic backpack with nothing inside. Despite the childish bag, she looked about my age. She had excess baby fat, the kind of flesh a person could grab. When she received the change for her pancake, she examined the coins, angling her hand to the light. She tucked the money into her pants. She bit into the fried batter, her front teeth tugging free a long, tantalizing shred of bright green. She sucked her lower lip clean of oil. The girl left. I thanked the couple, and I followed her. At half a block's distance, staying on the opposite side of the street, I kept pace through the walled alleys. In the dark, it was easy to keep her in sight, the backpack bobbing ahead like a lamp. I tried to walk quietly. Pigeons alit near me, jingling bells tied to their legs. Cyclists passed. I tripped over a pile of loose bricks. Her hair bounced lightly against the backpack's plastic bulge. As the streets emptied, I had to speed up not to lose her. She was hurrying, impatient to be home, I assumed, but then I saw her glance back as she turned a corner, the round face blazing, then disappearing. Despite the pains I'd taken, she looked afraid. I'd only wanted to follow her for a few minutes, but now, accused by her panic, I felt insulted. Then I saw something pale, a paper, flutter from her hand. Thinking it might be a note, a signal, I paused to pick it up, but it was nothing. Half her pancake, crumpled into its napkin. I resumed the chase. She dog-legged left. I was losing my breath. She halted, then bent down. I saw her adjust the strap on her sandal. She broke into a run, hobbling. "Hey!" I called. Thank you.
We are very lucky tonight, very, very lucky, and I'm very happy. Clancy Martin has come a long distance too to be here tonight, and I'm very grateful. His contribution is, he's your big brother, he's just fine, and it's the 7th excerpt from his memoir in progress that has appeared in Noon. His book, Love and Lies, is just out from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you, my fellow readers, and thanks everybody for being here. Like Mary, and possibly like Deb, my first published story was in Noon. And when my students ask me about going to MFA programs, I always tell them, well, I don't really know. I can't offer you much information because I went to the MFA program of Diane Williams, which is literally true. When I was first trying to send off stories, I would put in packets, these envelopes of 20, 30, 40 stories and mail them off. And one day I got a piece of mail back. This was in 1999, I think. I'd seen an ad in the back of the Paris Review for this new journal, Noon, and I sent it off. And there were 2 stories in there, and there were like 3 or 4 sentences, and everybody up front here can identify probably with me, 3 or 4 sentences that had been circled in these 2 long stories, each story probably 15 or 20 pages, and with a little post-it note that said, these are good. If you want to keep trying, send it back. And, you know, it's a total of maybe 30 words. And so I did keep trying. And I remember with my first novel, after I'd finished the first draft of it, I sent it to Diane, and about 2 weeks later I got it back from Diane, and it had another one of those damn little yellow post-it notes on it that you treasure, and it said simply, "We all fall down sometimes." D. And that particular version of the manuscript went in the trash, and I started again. But I owe my entire career as a writer to this woman, to Diane Williams. So thank you, Diane. And I'm going to, Diane came up with this, Diane and I together came up with this crazy project of writing a memoir over the course of, I think our plan was 10 years, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it done in time, Diane. I'm going to try. The next excerpts have to get longer. But I'm going to read. She's published, she's very graciously, sorry, I'm going to have to go to the table of contents here. Okay, so this is, as Diane said, this is the 7th from this memoir that I've been working on called Bill and Lisa, about my father who died kind of sad death in a mental hospital for indigents down in Miami, Florida about 10 years ago, and my stepsister Lisa, who was murdered. But this is about my big brother Darren, and it's called He's Your Big Brother, He's Just Fine. I was a clumsy kid and often fell down the stairs. One of the triumphs of my adult life was when I was walking down the stairs outside of a new apartment complex. I had recently left my wife, and this was my 3rd new apartment in the past 6 months. And with my 2-year-old in one arm and my laundry in the other, I fell, and I slid all the way down those gravel and concrete steps with my 2-year-old held high in the air. It was summertime, and I was in a t-shirt and shorts, and I felt justified for a moment as a father, which is an emotion I don't feel often. On one occasion, I was only 4, and I watched my big brother Darren, who was 10 or 11, hauling the vacuum cleaner with difficulty up the stairs. I followed him. Pat, my 2-year-old brother, came to the top of the landing as well, and when we were all at the top, suddenly Darren pushed the metal hoover down the stairs. It clattered and banged hugely. Then Darren began shouting for Grandma Jarvis, who was taking care of us. "Grandma, Grandma, Patty fell down the stairs! Patty fell down the stairs!" Darren, unlike many natural comedians, never strikes you as a bitter person, but he will cheerfully inflict comic pain on others. Once when we were working at Fort Worth Gold together, a briefly, wildly successful jewelry store in Texas, when he was 23 and I was 16, he would sometimes answer the phones just to show the new people how it was done. And someone on the other line asked for Lone Star Storage. Darren explained to the caller that he had reached a jewelry store. This happened 2 or 3 times in a row, and then Darren answered, "Lone Star Storage." He took the man's name and put him on hold. Then he confirmed with the man that he was several months behind on his payments. He put him on speakerphone so the growing crowd of us could hear. "That's why I was calling. I am sending a check next week when I get paid." Back on hold again. "Mr. Lawrence, did I get that right? You are Mr. Lawrence?" "Yes, sir, that's me, Samuel Lawrence." "You have a television in storage with us, is that right, Sam?" "Yes, sir, that's my TV. My furniture, my clothes, everything I own is in that storage unit." "Could you hold a moment, sir?" Darren took a few minutes to smoke a cigarette. "Mr. Lawrence." "Yes, sir. Call me Sam." "Well, Sam, I tried to stop the auction, but it's already happening down here. Your TV just sold for $7. He's got all your stuff out on the sidewalk and they're selling it all." "What? You're selling my TV?" "No, it's sold, Sam. Now they're onto your coffee table. Give me a minute, sir. Let me try again." "That's my stuff. You can't sell my stuff." "Hold." He dragged this out for 15 minutes or more while the huge crowd of us laughed at this man's agony. "You'd better get down here as fast as you can, Sam. I've tried to reason with him, but he said that after 60 days we can auction whatever we want, and there's a big crowd. It's going fast and it's going cheap." "You gotta stop him. That's all my stuff. I don't have a car." "Well then take a cab. Get on the bus. Whatever you have to do. I'll tell him you're on the way, and I bet he'll wait on the other stuff until then." "Don't let that TV go. I'm coming. Don't sell my clothes." The last we heard of Sam, he was taking a taxi to Lone Star Storage. For years, I would tell this story when I told my Darren stories, and I sincerely didn't understand the moral outrage it provoked in many people. Now, approaching 50, naturally I see what a cruel joke was being played on Sam by the 23-year-old jewelry salesman. What if Sam had used his last $10 on that cab, and he arrived there after closing, without even the money to get back home? What if he simply accepted the fact that all his material possessions were gone forever? That's what I would have done, as I imagine Sam's position. Many years later, after our father died, when Darren and I owned our own jewelry store in Texas, we were notified by a storage facility in Arizona that we had to come and pick up our father's things, or they would be auctioned off or otherwise disposed of. We didn't pay the bill, and although we planned to fly out and get the stuff, we never made it. Now I understand that these two events are bound together. I cannot imagine what it will be like when my big brother Darren dies, and I can't think how I will bear it, as I can't think how I will bear it when our mother dies. For years, I was certain that I would die before either of them, which may, of course, be the case. It's a selfish but normal thing to want to be the first one to go. One more funny story about our time in Texas. This was when Darren was married to his wife, whom he eventually left, but reluctantly. It was the same time as Fort Worth Gold. I was living with Darren and his wife. Darren's wife and I were in a long line at the grocery store. Darren was off fetching something. Then, when we saw him, he had his arms outstretched down almost to his knees, and between his fingers and chin, he was holding 6 or 7 giant packages of Pampers. At this time, Darren and his wife did not have a child, and she said, "What the hell are you doing?" He shouted, "Damn it, honey, I'm making decent money now, and I'm sick of my kids wearing paper towels. I don't care what you say, today I'm buying my kids real diapers." True story. I remember the way the women in the store looked at his wife. I was too embarrassed to laugh. Naturally, she left and waited for us in the car. In fact, trying to remember it now, I think she may have walked home. Darren had been away to prep school, Shattuck Military Academy in Faribault, Minnesota. My father, who also attended Shattuck, bragged about the school, but I later learned that when he had gone, and when they sent Darren there, it was considered a reformatory, not a high-priced gateway to a prestigious university. My father had the Shattuck School emblem tattooed in green ink on his right forearm, and I had always admired the masculinity of that tattoo, and I hoped I would attend Shattuck when I was older. But I knew I could never live away from our mom. I couldn't even make it through a 5-day second grade summer camp without faking a stomach illness to come home. Mom and I made brownies and mailed them to Darren at Shattuck. And I used my paper route money to buy books that Mom thought he would like. And once a week I would get to talk to him briefly on the phone. Long distance phone calls were very expensive back then. And we were calling the States from Calgary, so it was an international call. Later I learned from him that he begged Mom to come home every time they spoke. But he had been thrown out of 3 or 4 high schools in Calgary, and they, my mom and our dad, who lived in Florida, were going to make him graduate from high school. He lasted for a year. That was where I met all my drug suppliers, he told me later. I never could have been the cocaine king of Calgary if it wasn't for Shattuck. My California connections, my Denver guy, Wayne in Hawaii, they were all at Shattuck with me. When he was busted at age 18, he had 20 or 30 pounds of marijuana hidden under the sofa, and sheets of acid, and thousands of Quaaludes. But what mattered was the coke. I knew that's what they'd really put me in prison for. So when they came in, I got it and put it in the pocket of my sweater. And the last thing I did before they hauled me off was ask the cop if I could kiss Heather goodbye. Heather was his girlfriend at the time, but she waited for him while he was in prison, and then they married immediately after. And the cop said, okay. And I told Heather, honey, don't forget my sweater. And she said, like shouted, why the hell do you care about your sweater at a time like this? And I kissed her quickly and then whispered in her ear, just don't forget to grab my sweater. And she got it, and when they tore the house apart, they never found the coke, or I'd probably still be in prison. They sentenced him to 10 years at Spy Hill. Then my dad flew to town and paid off a judge, and the sentence was reduced to 1 year. And in the end, he did a month at Spy Hill, a month at a halfway house, and a few months living in our basement under Mom's legal supervision, before moving to Texas, where Heather had an aunt. But the reason I tell this story is that if Darren hadn't been away at Shattuck, he would have gone on the one family trip I remember as a kid. And if Darren had gone, I would have gone. He was 16 then, and I was 9, and there was a big science fair. My mom and stepfather were taking all of us kids, me, my brother Pat, and 5 or 6 of our stepbrothers and stepsisters, to Vancouver for several days. I used the science fair as an excuse to stay home. My mom said I could sleep in their room so that I could watch TV before going to bed. The first or second night the movie The Exorcist came on. I was excited to see it because I had read the book, and I was too terrified to leave the bed to turn off the television. I was too frightened even to pull the covers over my head because of the noises. I thought Linda Blair might come right out of that television. That was the most frightened I've ever been in my life, I think. I've been lucky. Watching The Exorcist at home, alone in the dark, in that big empty house in my parents' bed. For years afterward, I saw little Linda Blair, eyes bulging and hungry, staring at me every time I closed my eyes in the shower, and every night before I fell asleep, sitting at the end of my bed. Until recently, I would never sleep with my hand over the edge of the bed, for fear she would drag me under there with her. The science fair? My science teacher asked me if I wanted help with a project, and I thought I didn't need it. My submission was half of a hamster exercise globe glued to a piece of cardboard with some decorative plastic fish and a red octopus glued around it, painted blue and green to represent the seafloor. I took it on the bus with me downtown to the conference center. When the judges came by, I explained that it was an underwater city. I still remember how confused the 3 of them looked. The kid who won had constructed a model of a kind of barge with a rolling squeegee behind it that motored through a tank of water and pulled up an oil slick he had created. I called my mom, Collect, in Vancouver after the science fair from a payphone right outside the building. I had put my underwater city in a trash barrel and told her I missed her. When she asked about the science fair, I told her I didn't want to talk about it. I tried calling Shattuck. I had the number memorized, but they didn't accept collect calls. My first time scuba diving was with Darren. My first time in Vegas was with Darren. My first time with a hooker was with Darren. My first time doing cocaine was with Darren. I learned how to put someone in a headlock from Darren. The first adult book I ever read, Papillon, was given to me by Darren. Darren gave me my first Beatles album, and my first Doors album, and my first Pink Floyd album. My first trip to Florida, and to California, and to Arizona, and to Disney World, and to Mexico, and to Bangkok, all with Darren. The first money I ever borrowed, I borrowed from Darren. When I first got a girl pregnant, I called Darren, and he paid for the abortion. My first time in a psychiatric hospital, Darren was the only family member who flew to Kansas City. My first marriage, my best man, was Darren. He also paid for the rehearsal dinner. When I dropped out of graduate school to join him in the jewelry business, he made me prove myself. There was another fellow, Richie, who was a contender to be Darren's new partner. He told us both that he was going to observe us for a month or two, and that he would decide who would win the position on the basis of who worked the hardest. He had bought out his old partner with money from a business plan Darren and I had written together. Richie and I both had keys to the store, but I knew where Darren hid his cocaine. Since this is nonfiction, I should add that he quit doing cocaine years ago, as my older brother quit years ago. I quit as well. And I was 27 at this time, despite my sweating brow. And I was 27 at this time, and unlimited coke was an advantage I had over Richie, who was 3 years younger. Coked up, I would open the store at 5 or 6 in the morning, and by the time Darren arrived, the cases would already be full, and I'd have picked the diamond melly for his jobs, and I'd be sorting colored stones or working on mailers or ideas for the coupon saver. But what mattered most was the sales board, and it was at this time in my life that I overcame my years of shyness and learned how not to let any customer leave the store without buying a piece of jewelry. I learned how to call customers and invent stories about miraculous bargains on estate deals and with wholesalers in bankruptcy to get them into the store. I learned how to create deals out of nothing. I would refuse to leave at night until I knew Darren had pulled out of the parking lot and was halfway home. Often I'd stay until he called to check to see if I was still there. My wife was 6 months pregnant, and I rarely came home before midnight. Then it was back to the store by 5 or 6. This went on through August, September, October. Monday through Saturday I did this, including Sunday once the season started. Until one morning Richie came to Darren and said, "I think Clancy should be your partner." Everyone in the store knew already, of course. But by then, I had formed the habit of working those hours, which lasted for years afterward. When my first daughter was born on December 23rd, I remember going downstairs in the hospital, this was before ordinary people had cell phones, and calling Darren from a payphone to see how the numbers on the sales board were doing, and to tell him that I'd be back in the store on the 27th. I felt guilty and nervous that I wasn't there in the store that Christmas Eve. I kept explaining to my wife that soon we would be rich, and I wouldn't have to work these kinds of hours. But we didn't get rich, and soon I was divorced. It was at this time, too, that without knowing it, I resolved to kill Darren. It was then I first understood that Darren was my father. How I did it was the same way I had killed Richie, with the sales board. It took a few years, but there came a time when every month I was on the top of the boards. I would be angry then, if at the end of the day Darren had beaten me on the boards. Not angry at him, naturally, but angry at myself. By this time, I would do anything if it meant a sale, and I was destroying our business in the process of liberating myself. I didn't care if we lost money on a deal. I didn't care what lies I had to tell. I didn't care if I spent nights sleeping under my desk. We had a shower in our bathroom. I wanted to double or triple his sales numbers every month. When his wife was behaving strangely, I told him to hire a private detective, knowing what he would discover. When he left her and was suddenly lost, neither of us can live without a woman, I would only work or spend time with my girlfriend. I went to lunch with him once at that terrible time when he was suffering like I've never seen him suffer since, and I told him that he was better off without her, but it would take 6 months to know it. He moved into the same loft complex I had moved into in Dallas, and I saw him outside of work twice. The day he moved in, and at a Halloween party the owners of the lofts, young Dallas SMU bankers' sons, threw for all of their developments at our complex. He had rented a bishop's costume, complete with crozier, gremille, and mitre. I wasn't in a costume. And somehow Darren wound up in the pool. I remember worrying that he might drown in his red and gold robes, but he was laughing and 2 women took off their outfits and jumped in with him. He was doing handfuls of ecstasy at that time. He used to keep a jar of it on his desk at work next to his jar of Jolly Ranchers. And he'd offered me some at the party, but by then the only drug I liked was alcohol, and I was unhappy with the cheap frozen margaritas they were serving from machines at the party. My girlfriend and I went down the street to the Blue Goose and drank real tequila, and I was sick at the thought of how I abandoned him. But I kept telling myself, he's Darren, he's your big brother, he's just fine. I was there at the hospital when his son was born. His wife had suffered an ectopic pregnancy, so they adopted. And I held his baby son only minutes after he came out of his teenage mother's womb. Then a nurse insisted that the mother of the infant breastfeed the baby. This was a Christian hospital in Texas. And the mother decided to take the baby home with her. For 3 days in their home, it was me, Darren, and his wife. And I called Mom to tell her how badly things were going. Darren and his wife couldn't even speak to each other. Their grief was so sickening. But then on the 4th day, the mother called and told them that she wanted them to have the baby. And I was there when they brought him home. I don't remember Darren being at the hospital for the births of any of my 3 daughters, though he must have come to Harris Methodist when my eldest was born, late that night after they closed up the store. It was 2 days before Christmas, and in the jewelry business, that is usually your best day. Funny thinking about it now, that my first daughter was born on the very day that, historically, is the most lucrative day in the jewelry industry. The one day of the year that it rains down money, when the last-minute men are so desperate and hurried that the jewelry sells itself. When, with luck, at the end of the day, you look in the safe and at the checkbook and the next day's bank deposit and the cash you've socked away and realize, well, we might make it one more year after all. Or even, well, I guess we can buy that boat. And we did 1 year. I know he didn't make it to the birth of my next 2 daughters, or to either of my next 2 weddings. But there was a time when the fratricide I had attempted had drained us both white, and it has only been in the last handful of years that the blood has come back into our brotherhood. He will be here in Kansas City next week for his son's birthday. His son, his only child, goes to college where I teach, and he'll be staying with us at our home, which my wife and I bought almost a year ago, and Darren still hasn't seen. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. There's such generosity in this room, and I'm so profoundly grateful for these great works and that we can share them in Noon. And to all the people who helped put Noon together, our great staff, and to the center for hosting this every year. Thank you. There's still wine, I believe, and little nuggets to chew on.